Okay, good evening, everybody. So we're moving on to talk about four reincarnations with Max Ritvo. Our rest of our semester here, the next 2 weeks, we'll focus on this collection and how we can think about this as a space to investigate in a more full capacity the entirety of the text, and then attempt to present the component parts of a research paper that would allow you to fundamentally teach this text to a group of people who have read the book but perhaps don't have enough time or space to jump into the text as a whole. I mean, this requires us to read the book closely. So part of your final project is a close reading, meaning an analysis of the text. So looking at language, imagery, line. We'll talk about different poetic devices as they appear. And that will be part of this one. You won't be just doing one specific poem in a research paper. Typically, you would have parts of multiple ones. Your close reading for this particular final project will actually ask you to look at a few different poems and different sections of poems to look at a larger use of poetic device for the text. So we'll be looking at it closely. We're also going to be looking at what kinds of research we can do to better understand the book and get at what he's trying to understand, and see where we can go down paths that will open this up to understand it as a whole reason for reading it. So that may seem a little bit abstract at the moment. Probably the best possible thing we can do is just to get into the text and ask it some questions and see where it is that it leads us, and where it is, we can connect with it, because that is important. Though I say in your, sometimes in the comments of your papers that you write, that I'm less interested in the connection to the reader in those papers, because that's not really the purpose of the papers. Those are designed to work with your analytical skills. But when we're trying to engage with the text as a reader, I mean, there is some value in that as well, to open up where we can find interesting questions to ask it. So the book is called Four Reincarnations. So right there, I already have a place that I could do some research. I'm sure you know what reincarnation is in terms of like just the passing term, to be reincarnated, right? To become, to come back to life after death. But of course, there are many different things to think about with this. There's the religious implications of it. There's more of the psychologigical understanding of it, and sort of the cultural response to it. Thinking about how like Whitman would talk about, what is the grass? This is it. There's more than just one element to it. And of course, we have to ask the question, well, why four, right? Is there some significance to that? So these are areas where already the book is trying to show us, pay attention to certain things. But this gives us a place to research, but it also gives us a thing to think about. It is, in fact, reincarnation is, while it is about life and rebirth of life, which is inherently, not necessarily positive. You can do your research and you can kind of see why the problematic nature of reincarnation, but it also tells us much about the preceding concept, which of course is death. So, and when we read the book and we do a little bit of background research, you'll understand that Max Ritvo, he died shortly before, or either right after or shortly before this book was published. So he was very young, and was pursuing an MFA, a Master of Fine Arts in Poetry, and was working on this particular collection, and died in the process of that from cancer. So in this particular case, I think the book does ask us to think about who the person is who wrote it. So there's a lot of downer stuff in this one, and a lot of serious stuff in here, but he's asking us some big questions. So I'm going to start this up by looking at a few of the different things in the book. So things like the titles of it: Living It Up, The Curve, Holding a Freshwater Fish in a Pail Above the Sea, The Senses, The Watercolor Eulogy, Poem to My Litter, Hi Melissa, Dawn of Man, Black Bowls. So am I getting one single understanding with all of those? Not particularly, but they kind of bounce around a lot. So you see animals in there a little bit. I see some imagery of eulogy is in there, right? The watercolor eulogy, the sort of really pensive title, Holding a Freshwater Fish in a Pail Above the Sea. That seems, dangerous to me, and sort of like sick, if that makes sense, like a way to torture almost this animal. And then, Living It Up being the first title of the poem, in Foreign Reincarnations, which seems interesting. But I think I'll focus more on Poem to My Litter, and try to see and understand what we can do with this, right? What can we do for all of the component parts? What can we do to research? What can we do to create an argument? What can we do to do close reading? So there's always different information. Poem to My Litter by Max Ritvo. My genes are in mice, and not in the banal way that man's old genes are in the beasts. My doctors split my tumors up and scattered them into the bones of 12 mice. We give the mice poisons I might in the future want for myself. We watch each mouse like a crystal ball. I wish it were perfect, but sometimes the death we see doesn't happen when we try it again in my body. My tumors are old, older than mice can be. They first grew in my flank a decade ago. Then they went to my lungs and down my femurs and into the hives in my throat that hatch white cells. The mice only have a tumor each in the leg. Their tumors have never grown up, uprooted and moved. Learned to sleep in any bed the vast body turns down. Before the tumors can spread, they bust open the legs of the mice, who bleed to death. Next time the doctors plan to cut off the legs in the nick of time so the tumors will spread. But I still have both my legs. To complicate things further, mouse bodies fight off my tumors. We have to give the mice AIDS so they'll harbor my genes peacefully. I want my mice to be just like me. I don't have any children. I named them all Max. First they were Max 1, Max 2, but now they're all just Max. No playing favorites. They don't know they're named, of course. They're like children you've traumatized and tortured so they won't let you visit. I hope, Max's, some good in you is of me. Even my suffering is good, in part. Sure, I swell with rage, fear, the stuff that makes you see your tail as a bar on the cage, but then the feelings pass. And since I do absolutely nothing, my pride, like my fur, all gone, nothing happens to me. And if a whole lot of nothing happens to you, Max's, that's peace, which is what we want. Trust me. So briefly, in the summary, I just think it's a very beautiful poem. I think he writes, this is a very gorgeous poem. And what the content is basically is that they have taken the tumors from the body of the speaker here, and they've taken the cells of them, and they have tried to grow them again into litters of mice. And so they implant the same tumorous cells, cancerous cells, into the body of the mice and graft them on there, and then the mice are infected with the same cancer. But they keep dying. Their legs burst open because the tumors, they must be so active and so deadly that when they open, they bust open the legs of the mice, and they bleed to death. And if you notice, if you have your book, which I hope you do, you'll notice that "who bleed to death" is an incomplete sentence that sits itself on the end of the line. And the doctors think, we'll cut off the legs next time to prevent it from happening. They also found that if they gave the mice AIDS, which is an immunodepressive disease, they could actually help harbor them peacefully, the tumors. And then at the end of the poem, he begins to direct his attention and his discussion, his language directly to the mice. And this is how the poem ends, in this space of talking about nothing and having nothing happen to them. So there's a lot of information in this poem and a lot of ways to think about this. And so where I want to be the most helpful is to think about where we can talk about different elements of his work that seem to help us understand the poem as a whole, and therefore the book. So in this particular section, he's been writing about everything from to his lover saying, why do you love me so much when I'm this complicated? Right, he says in Living It Up on page 3, I wish you would let me know how difficult it is to love me. Then I would know you love me beneath all that difficulty. In other words, I can admit that it's hard to be with me. And that'll help me believe that you understand what it is to be with me. And then, we kind of go into this poem, The Senses, which I think is a really interesting poem, where he's kind of discussing how the the body feels good to him, the hat, the dryness of his throat, burning vegetables, but he thinks all these other thoughts, and they're separate from how he feels. And the feelings are great, but the thoughts lead him into some pretty negative spaces. And as this section goes forward, we begin to understand that this is a lot of mixed emotions in here, a lot of elements of confusion and love and regret, fear, and just basically how the mind can completely carry away into a different space and confuse our speaker constantly as he's dying of cancers and tumors that are quite old, that have traveled through his whole body. And so he has, in effect, a very long relationship with his own death and his own impending death, the knowledge of his own impending death at all times. Is constantly on his mind, and he has to wrestle with that, with the pain he feels in his body and the pain he causes others, both psychologically, emotionally, and also physically in this particular poem with the mice, who he is responsible for the deaths of. And so where does that belong? Where does that ownership belong is part of what this poem is asking. And part of what this book is asking. What does it mean to stay alive? What does it mean to be alive again? So in a way, in this particular poem, every time his cancer, if we can think about it like that, which is a really complicated way to think of this, is that, right, your body, your cancer, right, that belongs to this person in this way. You know, when it's given to this litter of mice, it's complicated. It's this, like, they become his children, they become products of him and extensions of his own self in the most disastrous way possible, in order to then receive help from these animals that he must kill. You know, the full knowledge of their death on him, they've done nothing, right, other than exist and have, I guess, genetic coding, which is, here's a place you could research, right, genetic coding similar enough to humans, sorry, similar enough to humans that they could actually do this. So he is responsible for their deaths. And so this poem now becomes a poem about responsibility. What do we do in the face of impossible responsibility? How do we handle impossible responsibility? Which is the question that I would want to lead into with this particular book, right? What is and how is this person handling the responsibility of his own death and his own life? Heavy stuff. I hope you dig this book. It's asking for a lot of your attention, and it's going to ask you to pay attention to it as you go forward in it. So I'll do more on Ritvo as we need them. If you have questions about anything, let me know. Next, we'll start talking a little bit more about how we can do research toward the text and understand it a little bit better. But hopefully you're starting to get some ideas from the video and from looking closely at this first poem, Poem to My Litter, which we will look more closely at as the semester goes forward. So thank you, good luck, and I hope to hear from you soon. Bye now.